Welcome to the Wise Old Soul. I'm your host, Lee Chandler, and together we are on a journey to a higher perspective. Hey, you have to love the way some things start. I love that tune so much, I just wanted to play it again.
There you go.
Welcome, everybody. I am so excited about having Sheila Seppi with me today. Sheila, how are you today?
I am awesome. How about yourself?
You know what? I'm doing very well. Thanks for taking the time to join us here on The Wise Old Soul. You know, we're going to tap into that wise old soul that we find in each and every one of us. And today, we're going to hear some of that wisdom from you. So thank you again.
Well, thank you Sheila, so much for the invitation.
I'm excited. Sheila, you know, I've learned a little bit about you. I've heard you on some other podcasts. I have not taken the time to hear your own podcast. Now that I know you're there and I know some of your time slots, I look forward to participating and hearing those. So thank you. But, you know, Sheila, up to the age of 38, you had a bit of a tough role, a tough time in your life. And I know from the age of 38 onwards, it's a different life that you've really had. Maybe you can touch on maybe pre-38, and then let's get into where things are today.
Sure. So pre-38 and even into age 38, I was a very, very sick person. I had been diagnosed over a period of 20 years with bone cancer, brain tumors, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, the possibility of being in a wheelchair by the time I was 40 due to MS. I was told that I had sarcoidosis, erythema nodosum. The list goes on. And prior to what we're going to talk about, I had just been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis and thought Celebrex was my best friend. And honestly, it was, because I was able to use my hands. I was able to move a little bit more. But most of my life at that point was being at work, coming home, immediately crashing on the couch, playing with my children. I had a 3-year-old son, a 6-year-old daughter, and a 12-year-old daughter. But most of my activity with them was from the couch, just because I didn't have the energy. The weekends was pretty much non-exciting for my kids too. I might go outside and sit in a chair while they played. But one of the things, what happened to me was I went to bed very much in pain, very sick, very, I guess you'd say depressed, to be honest with you. And it felt as if in the next morning, someone reached down, grabbed me by the hair of the head and pulled me bolt right up in bed. Then it was like lightning ran through my body. Then I was in white space, and I don't know how long I was in white space, but I was out of pain. I was very, very comfortable. I felt this sensation of overwhelming love. And I, you know, if I had my choice, I would have just stayed there. But the next thing that I knew, all of a sudden, my peripheral vision was coming in, and then my frontal vision. And I was sitting there in the bed looking around the room. Number one, what am I doing sitting up in the bed? Number two, everything was the same, but everything was different, 100% different. And I didn't know just how different. But what happened was, as I got up and I had walked across the carpet, it was as if I had just stepped on carpet the first time. And then I caught my reflection in a mirror, and I just stopped and was mesmerized. And it was as if I was looking out of someone else's eyes at an image being reflected back to me. I really didn't even recognize myself, and I was kind of really a little bit in shock. The next thing that happened, all of a sudden, I started having past life memories, which was significant because I didn't even believe in them the night before. I started remembering healing modalities that I had never studied and universal truths that I had no interest in. And honestly, it's taken like 23 years to unpack a lot of information, and it still continues to come. What had happened in that instant was my soul left the body and a new soul came in. So everybody hears about near death experiences, how a soul will travel and it'll be up in the heavens or having this wonderful experience, and then it comes back into the body. But for me, my soul went and it stayed, and another soul came in. And it was from that point on that I began to operate. I'm going to call it with a new operating system, because our soul is what really animates our physical bodies. And without that, then the body ceases to function. And so when that new soul came in, it began to immediately work on the body. And by the time I had gone back to the physicians, I no longer showed any symptoms of any of the things that we spoke about. Everything about me was different. Even my hair color changed a little bit. My eyes used to be, more blue. Now they're very, very vibrant green. And the way I articulated my sentences, my knowledge base obviously had changed. The taste in foods, the things I drank, the music I listened to, it was all very, very different than it was the night before this event happened. And so as I began to go throughout life, I did find a spiritual teacher 6 months within my coming into the body. The first 3 months, I left a dysfunctional marriage and took the children with me. The next 3 months, I then moved into a new state, a new home, and found my first spiritual teacher, who happened to be a Hopi elder. Now, I didn't go to her for a spiritual teacher, but I went to her because I was seeking clarity on what was happening to me. I'd never read a metaphysical book. I had no idea what was going on. And if someone had told me I was a walk-in soul, I would have laughed them out of the room. But in studying with this lady, she invited me to what's called a women's circle. And in the women's circle, we began to study the path of shamanism. And it was there that I began to learn shamanic journey. And I was able to then connect with my own spiritual team, my soul guides, and I began to receive information from them.
That is quite the story. Oh my goodness. And
Yes.
and to leave a dysfunctional marriage so quickly, like obviously things moved very quickly. Clarity must have started to formulate for you as
Yes.
well, at least clarity from a spiritual standpoint and what's right for you.
Yes, I don't think that the person I was before would have even been able to leave that marriage. I just don't think that they had the clarity of mind. I don't think that they had a feeling of support even within themselves, because you have to feel good about the decisions that you're making, even if they're uncomfortable decisions. You have to know that you're on the right path. And I think for her, there was a lot of situations that was causing, not just the brain fog, but that there was a lot of physical ailments, that it was just easier to stay in the dysfunction than to try to create something new when there was no leftover energy. And so once this new soul came in and I did decide to leave, it was very easy. That was within like a couple of days. It's like, I'm out of here. What do I need to do to prepare? And so there was no resonance whatsoever. It was already a dysfunctional marriage. So it was fine. I just knew what I needed to do. And the neat thing about the way that I walked in is I already had memories that stayed intact about how to function as a human. There's a lot of walk-ins that come in, they have to relearn to walk, to talk, how to care for themselves. I had all of those skills intact and they remained intact. I also had a very few memories of my children, but enough memories that I came in with a very deep love for them and also for my parents. And so other than that, I had no connection, and I had no memories of a lot of the people in my life. And so my mom sat me down at one point and said she wanted to talk to me. And I thought, uh-oh, here it comes. She's got this illness. But no, it was about me. She's like, I really want you to go to a doctor because I believe that you have the beginning stages of Alzheimer's. You don't remember your family. You don't remember friends. You try to fake that you do, but you don't know. And so she had this long talk with me, and finally I had to tell her, no, I don't need to go to a doctor. And when I explained to her about being a walk-in, the first thing she said, does that mean I'm not your mom? And I said, no, it doesn't mean that, but it just means that you now have a new and improved version. And she was okay with that. So I didn't have to go any further with it.
That's wonderful. And your children, that must have been a bit of a shock for your children being 3, 6, and 12, watching mom that's on the couch functioning in a totally different way. She gets up on a Saturday morning and wow. And a very short time
There we
after,
go. Let's go to the park and play.
and the
Yeah,
children,
yeah. So for them, yeah, they didn't skip
it,
a beat because for them, all of a sudden they had a mom that could play with them, a mom that was happy and joyful and that could run and do and dance and sing and do all these things with her kids that she hadn't before. So for them, it was a wonderful occurrence.
wonderful, wonderful. What a great story. What about,
Mm.
and I'm just going to stay on this topic a little bit before I move on, but as
Okay.
you said, you didn't have the opportunity to have a lot of memories of friends, maybe even some extended family and things. Have those people come back into the fold? Some of them have left. And I appreciate some people will just leave just because it doesn't align with what the narrative was back then.
Right.
Obviously we'd been told, you know, the way to grow up and what was happening around us from a spiritual standpoint.
Mhm.
But, um, you know, there's a total change there. So who's still in your life,
Yes.
and have a lot of people left?
100% of the people left. And that's okay. That's the way it goes. But because I ended up moving to another state, it was
Mhm.
just kind of this falling away. And I didn't stay in touch with people because quite frankly, I didn't remember them. But the beautiful thing is I have developed relationships with my family members. And so that's great. And so for the past 23 years, I have had cousins to come back into my life, people that I had known before. I'm not that close with them because, again, I can't, share all those stories that we had. So,
Sure, sure. And there's
yeah.
got to be, through this whole awakening process and through the walk-ins and etc., your abilities to see and interact with people and people that have crossed over and you know
Mhm.
cosmic entities is totally different. um, but at the
Mhm.
same time, you do attract some of those family members and, as you said, new friends, new acquaintances, the people that are supposed to align with you.
Right, exactly. And so I have noticed that, um, just like you said, a lot of people they come back and you do rekindle, whether that coming back is because that you had previous pre-birth contracts. You could have had, other agreements from a soul family or a soul group, so you just don't know, why that's occurring, but just that it does. And so, for me, like I said, I had never read a metaphysical book up to that
Right.
point. I didn't even believe in any of these things. And so automatically, when I started hearing voices of people that are not in the room giving me direction on how to lead my life, when I began to see people around me that nobody else could see, and they were talking to me, because my background was psychology, I thought I was having a psychotic break. And because I didn't remember a lot of people, I didn't have a lot of memories, I thought I was having some type of a trauma experience or disassociation. I had no idea really what was happening to me. And so that's why I sought out this counselor, because I needed some answers for me, because I didn't understand any of this. And I was thrilled to know that this is a spirit guide. And this is, these individuals, these are your teachers, these are, hearing and seeing people that have passed over. You have, these mediumship abilities and blah, blah, on down the line. And so, I still retain those abilities today. But at the
Mm-hmm.
time, it was almost like opening Pandora's box and everything jumping out at one time. And it was very overwhelming.
I can appreciate that. Now,
Yeah.
your walk-in experience, there's different types of walk-ins as well, correct?
That's correct. When I first learned about walk-ins, I didn't know that. I learned about walk-ins. I knew I was a walk-in. I began to work with my guides, as what I
Mm,
called them at the time, and
sure.
they began to tell me that not everyone's experience is the same, but I began to seek out people who were like me. And I also asked them, I said, look, am I a body snatcher? Did I take over a sick body? Because that really bothered me. I had no idea. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't, this was all brand new territory for me. And they explained to me, absolutely not, that there was an agreement made. In my case, it was, pretty instantaneous, but there still was an agreement made, because that instantaneous here is nonlinear time on the other side. So the agreement was made that I would come in, and the soul that was in this body had cried out to be released, and it was done. Its contract was over. It was sick. And had I not entered the body, this body would have just expired, and the children would have not had a mother. I wouldn't had to have gone through that horrific divorce. I wouldn't had all those life experiences. But there was an agreement. So when I came in, I just began to assume this life. Now you have to understand, when I was first told that I was a walk-in, I was angry, because that's not what I wanted. I went to this lady who I thought was going to give me a little blue pill that I could take and life would go back to normal. Remember, I had just been a very sick person and I was in the Western medicine systems. Today, that's not how I choose to do things. But at that time, I thought what Western medicine was the only way that I could go about these things. And so when she told me I was a walk-in, it took me a long time to digest that. And I didn't study about walk-ins. I did not read a book about walk-ins. Every time I tried to find something about walk-ins, I would pick it up and it's almost like, no, I can't read this. I have to put it down. And so now I know, I didn't read any books for many, 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 many years, literally up until the time that I wrote my book, Walk-ins Cosmology of the Soul. And it's not that that's a commercial, but it's just that when I was writing this book, one of the things I wanted to do, obviously, was to get my story out, because my guides had told me, yes, it's time, let's go. Now, I call my guides the collective, and I can talk about that a little bit later. But one of the things that happened was, in writing this book, I honestly thought I was going to find other individuals who had the exact same experience that I had had. I didn't know that there was anything other than what I am, which is a soul exchange. That means one soul left the body and another soul came in. I am firmly intact, and this will be the soul that remains in my body until this body expires. But I found out there's what's called a soul infusion. And this soul infusion is an integration of higher self or oversoul aspects. And it is not a complete exchange, rather, it augments the existing soul. So you could have 50% that left. You could have 20, 10, 5%, but there's part of that original or the natal soul that stays in the body. And it's a very symbiotic process when that happens. Then there's what's called a soul merger. And this is when the natal soul remains firmly intact, but complete aspects of the oversoul come in, or complete aspects of multidimensional aspects come in, and they fuse with the natal soul of the body. Then you've got what's called jumpers or poppers or pop-ins, and this involves a very brief interchange between souls. Now, when I say an interchange, there's no soul aspect that leaves, but it stays in the body, but it kind of takes a back seat. And this other soul comes in and it begins to, kind of take over the life and move through this life. These are all agreements that have been made on the other side. Now, there's also what's called an overlay. And this is when an overlay comes in. This is when the natal soul remains intact, but there's other aspects of the soul that come in, and they can either be permanent or temporary, and they kind of act like a battery charger, so they enliven that soul. The other thing is what's called soul step downs or step ins. Now, they're like mini soul exchanges, okay? And so they temporarily swap souls. So the natal soul leaves and another aspect comes in, then the natal soul comes in and that aspect leaves, and then a different aspect comes in and they all stay there, and then they all leave. So this is when each one has a very distinct purpose or mission and agreement with a person. It's kind of like, this celestial choreographing that's being orchestrated, and it's kind of like a divine dance of the souls, and one soul at a time then takes that center stage. There's also what's called soul projections, and this is something new that I talk about. I didn't talk about it in my first book. I do have a second book coming out, but this is when there's an off planet extraterrestrial being that's projecting part of their soul essence into a human form, and the original host may be still there, awake and aware, or they could be in some type of, like a suspended state, like in a stasis. Now I'm talking about the extraterrestrial being, and that would be any member of a star race that is not part of the human race. Then we have what's called the soul braids, and a lot of people have heard about soul braids. This is where you have two souls. This is a natal soul, there's another soul, and the two of them braid together. It's a very harmonious situation in the body. There's soul layering, and that's when you have multiple aspects of the natal soul. Now, one of the things that my group, my collective, began to talk to me about, the fact that for me, I came from what's called a collective. Now, my collective was a merging of the consciousnesses of all of my multidimensional aspects. So if my fist is an oversoul, these are all the multidimensional experiences that I can be having all at one time. And for me, mine had all come back. But when you have soul layering, you have a natal soul, then you have another aspect that comes in, another aspect, and another aspect that comes in, and they operate as individual units. They merge together to bring in higher aspects. A lot of times there are healers who are bringing in, or they are transmitting different and higher frequencies, and it's through this soul layering process. Then you have like what's called the multidimensional soul, and that's when the aspects of soul from other space times will merge with the individual soul, and it really provides an upgrade. You've got fragmented souls, which means that you have the natal soul, they fragment, and over a period of time or even a period of lifetimes, they all come back together. And in the new book, I mentioned, I don't go into the story, but I just mentioned that I've worked with a lady that has brought back 32 fragmented aspects of her soul from this lifetime and other lifetimes. And we have the collective souls, which I briefly hit upon. And this is, for a lot of people, it's a fascinating phenomenon where you have these multidimensional aspects of an individual soul merge to form one unified source. Typically, this is after all of the lifetimes have been completed, and the consciousness of this being then is not even in form any longer. It's pure consciousness, and that's where I was before I came in. And so with a collective soul, you can manifest from the group consciousness, shared spiritual entities, etc. But these are just a few types. Now, every time that I think that I have talked with people and they say, hey, yeah, this is, these are all the different experiences that I have. And I think, man, I've really got this down now. I hear other stories. And it's like, what kind of soul is that? I don't think I'll ever stop learning. There's no way to know the vastness of the soul, because when we're here, we're just one tiny little minute aspect. If you look at our soul as all the sands on all the beaches on this planet and all the other ones, this lifetime is just one of those tiny little grains of sand.
Sure. I had no idea that there was so many different levels and replacements and
Oh,
part-time replacement and back and forth. Tell me, Sheila, when people talk about they listen to their spirit guides, right?
mhm,
Or their higher
mhm.
self, um, that entity can be extraterrestrial, it could be spiritual, it could be part of who we were in a past life. All those different things, those different aspects can come to us. And it almost sounds like, from your perspective, those events, those experiences are literally touching the soul as well.
Oh, absolutely. My belief, we're eternal beings. The soul is eternal. I'm going to
Mhm.
tell you, forever is a long time. Every person listening to this, you included, everybody, we have
Mm.
had so many lifetimes that we can't even begin to describe it. We have been everything that there is to be in
Mhm.
this universe and other universes. We have all started either on a particular planet, in a realm. We have all had experiences being Arcturian, being Palladian, being Andromedan, being Lyran. We've all had these experiences. For me, I think it was important for me to have an awareness of that soul lineage so that I could share that with other people, so they could say, oh, yeah, that's what's happening to me. Yeah, I can relate to that. I understand. I'm not crazy. Because I'm going to tell you, I thought I was crazy for a long, and when I say crazy, I meant certifiable. Lock me up, because the things that were happening to me, the understandings, the information twirling around in my head was not the normal information I was used to.
They're just totally different. Yet, as different as it was, at what point then did it go from, I think I'm crazy, to harmonious? Because as we
Well,
speak today, you're totally aligned, there's total harmony in your life today.
yes. So when I met my spiritual teacher, I began to understand that there is another world besides this. I began to understand a little bit about the soul. Now, mostly what I learned about the soul was what came from my collective. But when I first found my spiritual teacher, and I found how to shamanically travel, and I could connect with these beings, I could talk to these beings. I could go future, go past, that I could, understand what was happening to me. the knowing of it and the accepting of it is two different things. I always tell people there's a difference from knowing the path and walking the path and becoming the path. I've now become the walk-in. I've integrated all those different aspects of me. But when I came in, remember, I came into a very sick body. And
Mhm.
so all of the cellular memory of this body was from the old person. It's like getting into a used car where the seats are torn up and the upholstery has to be replaced and there needs to be an engine overhaul. That's kind of where I was. And so little by little, the structure of this body began to be rebuilt, just like a car engine would be rebuilt. You know, my brain, the neurology healed. The cells of my body began to function properly. No longer was I plagued with these illnesses. I learned to eat differently. I learned to drink water. I was only drinking, Diet Mountain Dew, the nectar of the gods, which just about killed me. Yeah, that bad. And so, yeah, so that in and of itself says a lot. But, when I really accepted it and truly embraced it is when I started telling people about it because it was so different and it was so like, yeah, I believe my teacher and I believe my guides and I believe these things that I'm being told,
Mhm.
but I don't want anybody to know about it. I don't, but I've always been the walk in, and the people around me that are close to me know that I'm a walk in. But when I first started telling my story, probably back in 2018 is when
Mhm.
I first started talking about it, and it's not that many years ago.
Okay.
And that's when everything dropped in fully and anchored, because up until that point, I knew I was a walk-in. Other people knew I was a walk-in. I was a spiritual teacher. I was sharing all the information, but there was
Mm.
something that happened, um, really with the writing of this book. Now, one of the things was I had this freak illness that just came upon me, and all the organs of my body were shutting down. There was no explanation, nothing. The doctors wanted me to have a liver transplant. My kidneys were shutting down, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, I'm going home. They're like, no, you can't walk out of the hospital. I'm like, watch me. I'm not staying here. No, I was
Mhm.
in the hospital for 3 days. I didn't let them do anything to me but take blood. And I said, you can have blood and study it. And their solution was a liver transplant. Mine was to go home and let my collective heal my body. And so that's really what I did. But it was during that I believe that there was more of that collective energy, because it was during that period of recuperation that I really had space that I hadn't had before in my life, because up until that point, I had been raising kids. I
Mhm.
had a very busy job. I was seeing clients, blah, blah, blah. But then I have this month period. And I mean, I healed just like that. So, I mean, I was back at work in 6 weeks, but my that period of time was enough stillness that it was like shoo, 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 information, 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 information. It was just like all this information dump, and then something clicked into place. I knew I was a walk-in. I operated as a walk-in. I believed I was a walk-in, but there were these massive amounts of information that came through with that illness. And so for me, really talking about this changed everything. When I wrote the book and I started sharing it, and then I found out there were other people who had actually had similar, not exact experiences. They didn't remember the process, but there were a lot of similarities to their stories and mine. That really helped me. And it gave me a new passion. It's like, yeah, I really want to help people. I really want to do this. And that's why, the Galactic Alliance came into being. And that's why I started doing all the podcasts, because I wanted to bring other people's experiences forward so people could have these platforms. Because when I came in 23 years ago, there was hardly anyone talking about
Mhm.
walk-ins. And I think the only book that had been published was Ruth Montgomery's book, which I still have never read. I've flipped through it a little bit, but I've never read it, nor have I read another book about walk-ins. But I've got a lot of books about walk-ins, but it's kind of like I flipped through it. And my collective is like, it's almost like don't muddy your mind with other people's experiences. You have to know what's yours and what's true. And the more that I embrace the my collective, more that I understand who they are and my place within that collective, things have just, moved and shifted and changed. And, I have new energies. I've had an elder Andromedan lady that is now working with me when I'm doing healing work. And, I just have all these different guides. I've been given a new healing modality, soul reconnection technique. I've always worked with the Arcturians when I do my healing work, but then one day the Arcturians stepped back and I had an angelic and an Andromedan that came in, and they said, now we're going to teach you about the ley lines. And me being me, it's like, oh, we call those the meridians, like I'm going to teach them something. And they're like, no, we're talking about the ley lines of the body. And I'm like, yeah, we call those meridians, thinking, I'm so smart. And they're like, no, the ley lines of the body, they go left and right and front and back to eternity. I'm like, oh, oh, I didn't know that, and so I started watching them perform this technique on people. And I always try to take notes so I can share the information, because I've tried to record sessions and a lot of times the information just doesn't come through, or we have problems and it's just not worth it. So I just go ahead and try to make some notes. A lot of times that's when I'm doing some really in-depth light language work, and it depends on who's coming through me as to, the type of light language that's spoken. But the light language is basically an activation of light codes within these ley lines that provide additional healing. And then information will come in like, oh, you have, we call that. When I'm looking at the ley lines, they look as if there's hairballs stuck. And so they begin to take these little fibers of the hairball, the hairs, for lack of better terms, they take those out one by one, and they'll say, the reason that this person is having self-esteem issues, and that it started at the age of 7 in this life, blah, 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 blah. And then in another life, it's because they brought in a soul wound, blah, 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 blah. And they'll just begin to tell me all this information. That's what I try to write down for people so that they'll have that. And then by the end of the session, it's almost like people are, very lightheaded, kind of woozy. And it takes just a little bit of time for them to recalibrate. And so these energies that work with me, I call them my healing team, but they also are part of my collective. And so within my collective, if you want to think of this as being an oversoul, the way that I was taught, because I had no knowledge about oversouls. I mean, it was hard enough for me to imagine that a soul could leave and a new one could come in, and animate the same form. So when I began to learn about this, they had started explaining all about the structures of source and how we incarnate. And I've got charts and all that kind of stuff. And I've got a great little chart in the new book that shows the progression of the soul. But by the time we get down to the oversoul, that's the individual aspect that has come from, a soul family, and then a soul group, and then it's into the higher mind and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, when you get into the oversoul, these little experiences, being the multidimensional lifetimes, are also what's called the Shantias Khan. And within the Shantias Khan, and this is the oversoul, but notice this oversoul is still connected to this body. This is also connected to a massive higher self. So you have within the Shantias Khan higher self stream, actually, a little piece of all of this, but you have the higher self, you have those components that's going to make up the spiritual bodies, and then you have the soul. And so the higher self, as it begins to become denser and denser and attached to the physical form, what attaches is then called the soul or the personality of this lifetime. And that
Hmm.
information can go up and down and yada, yada. So then there's also the expansion process. And that's what makes up all of the spiritual bodies. Now, when I first started, my teacher had taught physical, mental, emotional, spiritual bodies. But as I began to work with my collective energies and as I began to work with this healing team, they said, nope, you know what? I'm going to teach you something different. And what they showed me was, yes, we have the physical body, we have the etheric template, and we have the emotional mental body. The emotional mental body being one body, because all of these bodies are held together by electromagnetic frequencies. And the mind and the emotions actually are one, with the higher aspect of the mind being the highest octaves and the emotions being the lower octaves, which is next to the etheric body. And so the etheric body holds like your blueprint for the physical body. It holds the epigenetics of the soul, and that's what imprints on the cellular structure to bring the you that are you now into form and into being. And so outside of that emotional mental then is the astral bodies. And then from the astral body, there's this little thin layer that connects the astral body to the causal bodies, your spiritual, celestial, and crystalline bodies, and that is called matrices. These little matrices, and not matrices like the false matrix, which is a whole story in and of itself, but these are matrices that are attached to the heart, to the throat, to the third eye, and to the crown, that also attach out into these other bodies and out even further into the universal structures. And so when they started teaching me about that, my mind was blown. And I was like, okay, I gotta keep checking this out. And so the more sessions that occurred, the more information I gathered, until I said, okay, now this is great stuff. I now have this new healing modality that I'm going to do. And they're like, well, wait a minute, we want you to teach that. And I'm like, this is mine. I just created this. I'm sorry. This is going to be my signature modality. And they're like, no, it's our modality. This is what you're going to do. And so, the collective really takes a lot of different forms.
Sure. And what I'm hearing, I love that the fact you thought that was yours, right?
Yeah.
And and the some of the wisest people and the most down to earth people that I've had the privilege to meet and have in my life are those that learn something, but to really understand it, you have to teach it,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And listening to the different stages as we went through there, and the electromagnetic fields, um, there has to be a connection with those electromagnetic fields into sound as well, the hertz,
Oh, yes.
right?
Yes.
Because
They're all associated with different vibrational frequencies. And
Mhm,
then they also tie into, they call them the energy vortex centers, and we call them the chakras, but
mhm,
they're connected in with the chakras, and each one of them, as they get calibrated, has a certain hertz. But that hertz then between what's in the etheric bodies, the meridian system of the body, the actual meridians, the
sure,
ley lines, and the
yeah,
chakras, then the DNA vibrates at a certain hertz. And a lot of people are like, "Oh, you've activated my DNA." It's like, First off, no. You are already everything. You're already those things you seek to become. You've just forgotten it. And
mhm,
what we do is try to teach people how to drop back into that which they already are. because we're already perfect and divine. We're already connected in to the highest dimensional frequencies. It's just that as humans, that's not really the experience we came here to have. We came here to experience duality. We came here to wake up, to remember who we truly are as souls. And so if we get all the answers and we know everything at the beginning, it's kind of like, another experience. We're going to have plenty enough experiences where we remember everything. But just think, as a human, if you remembered every past life on this planet that you've had, every past life on every other planet that you've had, every experience all the way back to source, our
Mhm.
little human minds would explode. There's no way. And everybody's like, well, I want to see, I want to, it's like, you know what? If you could see everything that's around you, you would freak out. You really would. From the different dimensions. I mean, we could be standing in a train station right now and a train running through both of us, you know? And so we don't need to see all of those things. What we need to do is focus on who we are, the experiences that we're having, because that's what all existence is about, is the experience and the edification and the growth of the soul, because that's why Source even begun this experiment, so to the experiences to help Source even grow bigger and more, because Source had created everything and then designed to know what it was like to be the created.
And sure. And as I look at it, we chose to come here, right? For that
Yes,
experience. And as
absolutely.
you have, right. And as you have spoken, you're talking about blowing one's mind, right? I'm sitting on the other side, following most of it, and then all of a sudden I go, whoa. And the left side of my brain, I think, kind of just exploded a little bit and tried to come back down. But um, what I'm seeing also is, and I'm shifting a little bit, people that are my age, right? I came out of the 50s, early 60s, and we were told certain things the way we had to be. And this discussion that we're having now, as you said, really wasn't being talked about 20 years ago. Let's go back 60 years ago. It was
Right,
totally kibosh. We just did not do that. And
right.
I know there's many people that are my generation, which is a little ahead of yours, um, that are now awakening. They're saying there's a
Mhm,
lot more to life. There's a lot more that they're feeling, and and many of the things that you've been talking about from a walk-in perspective, but also all these different energies and magnetic fields, the meridians, the ley lines, all of that is being felt, I think, by more and more people, me
mhm,
included, saying, what the heck's going on? Right. And and so obviously my podcast that we're doing, The Wise Old Soul, that's what it's about for me, because I truly believe that each person has all the answers that you're discussing. And we understand that we have some innate information inside us. It's just a matter of getting tapped into it. And so having these discussions with you,
right.
Sheila, and others starts to awaken people more and more. No different than when you met the Hopi elder, something cracked inside you, just opened up, and you
Mhm.
became. It was almost like it sounds like they almost put a funnel and just started pouring this into you, right?
Yes. Yeah. I think I was very, very lucky, because I work with a lot of walk-ins, and there's some people, they have horrific times integrating. And even though, but I also say I was a mom raising kids. So my first priority had to be to the kids. Then at nighttime, when the kids went to bed, then it's like, okay, now what is this walk-in thing? I don't really understand. How can that be? Then I started working with it. So I really only gave myself permission to be the walk-in after the kids went to bed, and then I started feeling into that. But The feeling into it was when I would go into my meditations and when I would connect with at that time, it was a single guide. And you see, World of Spirit will only give us what we can handle at any given time. I truly believe that, because had I been given all this information that I have now then, I don't know my brain would have exploded. I don't know what else to say, but I don't think I could have handled it. And there has to be, because, like you, I was born, you in 61. And so that's not the lifestyle we were taught. We were taught hiding under desks because, there may be a bomb coming our way.
Sure.
We went through all of those types of experiences, and the world that we have today is very, very different, very open. But just like with accepting the walk-in, we had to accept the times and be ready to open up. And I don't know if I'm sure that there were walk-ins, but a lot of people didn't talk about it. They didn't understand it. Ruth Montgomery surely did, because she wrote that beautiful book. And so, you know, eh, just this unfoldment process that's happening right now, I think is also part of the reason that I came to be part of that unfoldment, because there are tons of people every day waking up. And it's so cool to watch even these new kids that are coming in. They have these phenomenal gifts. They come in already knowing how to play guitars and knowing how to sing and play the piano, and they know about astronomy. They know all of this information because it was the other generations that have laid that foundation, a solid foundation for these new higher vibrating souls to come in. A lot of times when I meet walk-ins today, man, they know they're a walk-in, they're connected. That's not what happened to me. And a lot of people that in the late 90s, when I came in, that's not really what happened for us. We weren't able to hit the ground running. We had that integration process. We had to unprogram those things that had been programmed into us. But
Sure.
now there's such an accepting atmosphere, not just about walk-ins, but about spirituality as a whole. The new book that I wrote is also incorporates talking about the star seeds, and it talks about the hybrid souls and the physical hybrid humans. And so I guarantee you 20 years ago, if you said, "Oh yes, a hybrid human,"
No,
I mean, walk in, maybe, but a hybrid, no. So because of this spiritual growth,
sure.
people are beginning to accept, oh yeah, I come from the Pleiades. Oh yeah, I'm an Arcturian. Oh yeah. And so as more and more people wake up and understand that as a
Mhm.
human society, our knowledge has been kept very, very limited because of the control, the greed, all of these various aspects that make this planet this planet. Okay. But despite that, we're waking up. We're becoming unplugged from that false matrix. Our DNA is shifting, and so everyone can hold more and more light as all these photonic waves are crossing the planet. We can grab that, we can hold it, and then we begin to vibrate with higher frequencies. When we vibrate higher, everyone around us vibrates even higher. And I read something that said one awakened soul can generate a high enough frequency that it begins to go out to over 1,000 souls. And the higher that vibration, it can reach thousands of souls. And as those thousands of souls wake up, they're beginning to generate. And I just love that, because it's like an unfoldment of this wake up energy that's happening. It's like the rose is blooming.
It, I would agree. The whole rose tree is blooming.
Yes,
So,
it is.
just so I get a little bit of an idea, Sheila, you work with people one on one.
Mhm.
And you also have numerous podcasts. And so
Yes.
why don't we take a minute? I'd like to start, I believe, your first book. Maybe
Okay.
you have that with you. There it
Yes.
is. Now, where can
Walk in.
people find, there you go, Walk In. Where can people find that
That's right.
book?
Amazon. You can find
Perfect,
that always on Amazon. And you can also go to my website, SheilaSeppi.com.
perfect. Now, let's briefly touch on your second book that's coming out in June, which is The
Mm.
Cosmic Convergence.
Mhm.
And I believe you co-wrote that with Barbara Lamb as well. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. And so I wrote the chapters, and then Barbara provided case studies of individuals who had had those experiences. So when I write about the walk-ins, Barbara is all about the people that she's interviewed that are walk-ins or discovered that they were walk-ins during their hypnosis session. When I write about StarSeeds, she writes about the hypnotic sessions associated with star seeds, and the same thing with the human hybrids. And I wanted to do that because I wanted people to not just hear the information that I have that's coming through, but I wanted to people to hear it from like Barbara's perspective when she's interviewing people, the types of experiences they're having, and how what I'm talking about shows up in every day to day people's lives.
Sure. And there's
So
many books that,
that all I'm sorry. I was just going to say, cross our fingers. It will be out in June or July of this year. It's through the final editing stages, and then we had a beta tester, and they were like, uh, "No, we need to. You need to go back and to look at a couple of things here. What are you talking about?" And I'm like, "Okay, so you always have to go back and redefine, but it
sure,
should be out no later than July."
perfect. Well, that's
Sorry,
exciting.
that's
And
I'm in a home that has some little dogs that just broke the door open. One of them being mine. This is
no
Willow.
worries. There you go. You know, I've read a lot of Dolores Cannon's work, um, which I found absolutely fascinating. And obviously,
Mhm,
Barbara is still with us. And it's nice to
mhm.
be able to have stories that are quite fresh, obviously, things that have
Yes,
happened in recent times. And so
yes.
I look forward to it. And as you said, people can find you on
Mhm.
SheilaSeppi.com. We'll make sure that we put that in the description at the end.
Thank you.
And I must say it's been a pleasure. I could sit here for another hour or two, and I know you have some things going on later on this evening, but I want to say thank you so much for making time for us
Mm.
and visiting us on the Wise Old Soul and sharing that wise old soul that is in you as well.
Well,
Thank you so much,
thank you.
and I look forward to seeing you again in the near future.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye bye.